This tank beside me was set up just 3 weeks ago, and today I'm going to show you guys how I went from this to this in that little amount of time. So let's get started. Start by talking about how I set this tank up. For starters, I did the substrate system a little differently than I usually do. I added a mesh bag with lava rock to create a lot of height, and then I added old soil from the previous tank, which I think was a big difference maker. The idea is that this is populated with colonies of microbes and bacteria. These will be able to start growing really quickly and give this tank a good head start. And I think this is one of the key attributes that had led to the faster growth I had seen with this tank. For this tank, I'm using Powder Neo soil. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about all the equipment I'm using on this tank, but it will all be listed down below in the description for those interested. Hardscape for this tank was pre-assembled. I used black lava rock and the liquid superglue toilet paper technique. Now, plenty of other creators on YouTube have shown this and talked about it in great detail, so I'm kind of going to skim over it and not really go too much into it. But afterwards, you get these nasty white marks on the rock, so I had to go in a second time with super glue and then apply some crushed up aqua soil over it, and you're gonna see here that it creates a much nicer gradient. You don't get those white specks, and things look pretty good. Now it's time to wet the soil and begin planting. Next up, we're adding the carpet. I decided I'd make one pot work, but this took forever and I had to split it up into a ton of tiny portions. One thing you may notice is as I work, I'm gradually raising the water level. This just makes planting a lot easier in my opinion and makes it so less things float up after I'm done. I actually didn't have a single plant float after I finished this scape. Now we're attaching the star of this tank, the Bucephalandra, to the rocks using cyanoacrylate superglue. This is the first time I've remembered to use gloves, and I didn't realize how nice it would be to not get all my fingers stuck together after I finished gluing some plants. The only plant I bought for this scape was the dwarf hairgrass. One thing I like to do is keep these little immersed setups on hand, so I can hold plants that I enjoy even if I don't have any room left in my own scapes. This means I don't have to rely on any of the other stores in the area to have that one plant I want, or wait for it to be shipped in. I'll always have what I want on hand. Here's the tank the day after filling it. So how did I get it to grow so fast? The truth is, I didn't need to do too many things, but there was a couple of factors that led to this fast growth that we're going to talk about. Now, of course, one of the biggest factors is the equipment I'm using. I've got great lights, a great CO2 system, and a good substrate system. But the thing is, I've used all this stuff before, and this is the quickest I've ever seen this tank grow out. Now, I think one thing we need to take into account is that everything was dialed in. I knew how much CO2 I needed to add. I've found what I think is a great light spectrum, percentages wise, that just works for this tank. And I didn't have to mess around and find that to get it to work. So that saved me a little bit of time and is part of the reason why I got my results so quick. Now, one thing I've done that many people won't recommend is I have my lights running at 100%, and I've had them running at 100% from the get-go. A lot of people worry that if you start your lights too strong, you're gonna get a lot of algae, so they start low and then gradually work their lights higher and higher, but I just started them at full blast. Now there's a couple reasons I've done this, and a couple reasons I've gotten away with doing this. So usually, if you start a tank with the lights on this bright right from the get-go, you're gonna get absolutely swarmed by algae. But there's two reasons I haven't, and that is number one, my seeded substrate system with the aqua soil from the old tank, and then number two, the maintenance schedule I've been following since starting up this tank. And I'm gonna talk about why. When you use any kind of aqua soil, whether that's ADA Amazonia, Fluval Stratum, or what I used, which was Neo soil, they are all going to leach ammonia into the water. Now, this helps cycle your tank, but algae also loves this stuff. In my case, I have the colonies of bacteria already in there with the seeded aqua soil. So these will be able to get a head start, breaking this ammonia down into a less toxic nutrient, nitrite, and then an even less toxic nutrient, nitrite, that algae doesn't like as much as it does ammonia. Now, even though I've seeded this tank with a colony of bacteria, I'm still going to get a buildup of ammonia, nitrite, and nitrate. So for these first 3 weeks, I've worked really hard to keep these levels low and just keep the nutrients in my substrate where the plants can get it. So for the first week, every single day after the lights turned off, I did a 30% water change. This would keep the nutrients low, allowing my bacteria colony to get bigger and allowing my plants to work with what little nutrients were available and the nutrients in the substrate. Then for week 2, I lowered my water changes to every second day, doing 40%, and then again after the lights turned off and after my CO2 turned off, so I was keeping things consistent for the whole light schedule, and plants love consistency. And then last week, week 3, I lowered it to every 3 days, so I did 2 water changes last week, and things are still looking good. By this point, the bacteria colonies have started to build up a little bit, and they can handle the nutrients a bit better that are being leached from the aqua soil. The key behind this fast growth has been understanding how aqua soil works. It's not specifically just this brand. All aqua soils are really good nowadays, but you need to understand what they're doing in your tanks. They're going to be releasing this ammonia and all these nutrients that algae will be able to get to if you don't keep up with it and keep those levels low to where your plants are happy, but it's not leaking into the water column and algae can grab it. One thing you may notice is I've had really fast growth in this tank, but not once have I talked about adding any kind of liquid fertilizers, and I actually don't recommend doing it. These aqua soils are so well made nowadays that you don't need to worry about those for at least the first 6 weeks, and I'm not planning to dose any fertilizers on this tank anytime soon. A lot of people, when they're setting up new tanks, they'll see videos and they'll see people adding all sorts of things to the substrate system. Things like Osmocote Plus or different root tabs. Now, I've done that in the past. I've seen other people do it and copied it. And honestly, it leads to way more headache than it's worth. You're just going to be putting in way too many nutrients and algae is going to explode. So in this tank, you notice I just did the substrate system. I didn't add anything special. I haven't added any fertilizers, and I'm just keeping up with high levels of maintenance to keep those levels down, and my plants are growing like crazy. It's really easy, but a lot of people really overcomplicate things and ending up doing way more than they should be, and then they get problems like algae, especially when starting up a new tank. So for those who have watched this video all the way to the end, I want to solidify this take-home message that when you're working with aquasoil, it's a great product and I'd recommend doing it if you're not, is that you don't really need to do anything else. This stuff will do most of the work for you and give your plants all the nutrients they need for at least the first 6 to 8 weeks, depending on how many plant species you have in there. It also just throws out a lot of excess, so during the early stages, you need to get rid of that to keep your algae at bay and allowing those plants to get a head start and grow as beautifully as the ones have in this tank. But anyways guys, I hope you enjoyed this video and learned something new. There'll be more content coming soon. This was Kelm's Fish Tanks. Thank you so much for watching. Peace.